Gavin Bocquet, production designer for Silo. The show is based on the book series, and it has such a specific setting, an underground silo in a dystopian future. So where do you begin with this? Because you have the source material of the books, and obviously with Grammys, the showrunner.
Yeah, I think we began as a threesome really with Morton Tilden, the first director, and Graham Yost and Hugh Howey as well, all discussing the basic look or style. And Hugh was very good in the sense that he understands that the moving image is a very different way of telling stories than the written word. So we had a lot of freedom in what we produced. And we started off on a very sort of soft prep time of about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, where we were just trying to throw different ideas, concepts around for how the silo could look. And one of the early references from everybody was a sort of East European Russian type of 50s, 60s architecture, maybe in concrete, maybe in a very sort of robust material. We did do some concepts that added quite a lot of metal structures and support structures within the silo, but it became very easy to turn it into like a sci-fi spaceship type of look. So we soon went away from that, and we all agreed that this rather robust, sort of heavy concrete architecture would work well in that world. And it would also, with the concrete, give us a lot of opportunity for aging, which was very important in a mile deep silo, to try and give a different idea for what levels you were on, as obviously the lower levels being much wetter and damper and more distressed than the upper levels. So that was our original plan, and that was how we moved forward into this sort of this style that we eventually arrived at.
Yeah, I definitely prefer the gritty utilitarian look. Well, the silo is supposed to be 144 levels. You obviously did not build 144. So how much did you build? And what was it like working with like visual effects to expand the rest of the silo?
Yeah, I think on these type of shows, it's really critical that the visual effects department supervisor, Daniel Rauschenberger, came on board really early, because there's always that decision, quite simple question of how much do we build and how much did visual effects build? And there's never a one answer to that. It depends on the scene and the setting and what's required in that sequence. But obviously, having to build maybe 70 plus sets, we knew we didn't really have the budget and the stage space to do all those sets as individual sets complete, certainly on the larger scale ones. So we knew the shaft and the staircase set was going to be one of the critical areas. There's a lot of action in that world, and it was going to determine an awful lot about the personality of the silo. So we didn't have a stage or a studio when I joined, and that was being sort of looked for as an old industrial space. And we did find an old sort of cold storage unit facility that had one space that was about 40 foot high. So we knew we could possibly get 2 levels of balconies within that space. So we had one central staircase that connected from one floor to the next floor. So the directors can continually shoot from one balcony down to the next balcony and around the staircase. But obviously anything wider than that, looking up or looking down or moving through that world, then there'd be a visual effects enhancement. And obviously it was a repeating pattern in many cases. So that obviously made it a little bit, I wouldn't say simpler for visual effects, but having a repeating pattern going down a mile was easier than a set or environment which was changing every 30 or 40 feet. And we ended up only building, I think, 3/4 of the circle of the silo. The other quarter of walls was green screen, where we could quite quickly, obviously in visual effects terms, produce other levels that didn't look like the apartment level that we built. So that was by far the biggest set, and established really what we had to do for the rest of the environments down there, whether industrial, offices, apartments.
Mm-hmm. I love the apartments and like some of the offices we see, because you just really, like you were saying before, you could see the different social classes, right? Like obviously the upper class, you're higher, and then there's like the middle class, and then down below, and like those, in those rooms you could see like the people's personalities, because it's their home, and there's a little bit more color and different layouts. And like Bernard's office is blue and completely clean. So
Yes,
also
yes.
like designing those spaces for the inhabitants.
Well, obviously, any spaces like that, that offices and living spaces, obviously allow us and certainly Amanda Bernstein, the set decorator, to create and help the personalities of the characters, because that's where they spend their time, and with their living apartments, that's where they live. And the challenge is always for us to understand, when the whole show is put together, that the audience will understand these level changes, that because you don't shoot in order, you don't shoot in up, middle, down, it's all sort of rather jumbled up. So it's only when the whole thing is put together, you know whether you've achieved that separation and the audience can start to understand. I mean, it was hard in one way because obviously a lot of the architecture is based on a module system, as it would have been at that time. So there's a similarity throughout the silo, whether you're in the top or the bottom. So we had that challenge in terms of also trying to dress those environments to be on different floors and different levels and have different personalities. But obviously, from a budgetary point of view, it did help that the architecture had a similarity all the way through. But as a challenge, we didn't want the audience to think that we were just shooting the same space all the time.
Yeah, for sure. I also like that a lot of like the shapes of like the windows and the doorways and everything were soft. They were round, like there were no hard edges because it was like they're in a circular silo.
Yeah, I
So
think whether that's is a sort of simplistic answer, but yes, that is what we decided to do. That everything was based on circles where we could and form. So you had that character running right the way through, and it took away a slight sort of hard edgeness that could have come about if it was all angular. So because it was a pretty sort of hard and earthy environment we were producing. So, but it was where people were living. They've been living there for 300 years. So you had to make it appear as much as you could as though it was a pleasant place to live. Obviously, that's arguable, but within it, sort of in our dressing world and how we finished the sets, we wanted them to feel as though people were comfortable living there.
mhm. One of the most striking scenes is when Juliet is in the cornfields. How much of that was real?
Yeah, that was always going to be a challenge, and we knew we had to build a certain amount of the cornfield for the running and the chasing. And the question is, how do you produce the corn? Well, we were using Pawnbrokers, a great greens company in the UK, and we knew they could grow the corn. They could grow a certain amount of corn in the time, and we did start to grow half of the amount of real corn we needed. But then, because of schedule changes, the dates didn't work. So we had to start again. Pawnbrokers had to start again,
Oh
build
no.
for another 4 months of growing corn. And I think we also managed to get every bit of fake corn from the US, every prop house we could find. So we had half real corn and half fake corn. And I can't remember the full square footage, but it probably covered maybe 2 or 3 tennis court sizes.
Oh my God.
Then obviously surrounded with green screen for any of the wider shots, because the farming levels were quite large. They went across the full width of the silo in its real world. So it was more of it was interesting getting the corn right, in the sense of making the real corn look like the fake corn and the real corn actually growing, in the middle of winter in the UK. But as a set, it was quite more of a functional thing we had to do to get it right, to look right and stand upright and feel as though you're in a real cornfield.
So how do you go about doing like matching the real corn with the fake corn?
Well, we hoped for a lot of luck. So, but we obviously knew what real corn would grow like, and obviously the fake corn, to be fair to the US fake corn world,
Was great fake corn.
was pretty close. They'd obviously spent time, and we did have to do a little bit of painting, a little bit of puffing over certain instances to get it to work. And we put the best corn was obviously close to camera corn, if you put it that way, and the fake corn was a bit further in the distance. So it was one of those sets that is very simple, but takes up quite a lot of your logical time.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Well, lastly, the show has been renewed for a second season. Has there been any like early discussions about season 2 plans? Like we could you could totally expand it based on what happened in the finale, what we see in season 2. So,
No, sure. Well, I'm not doing it. I'm doing something else.
oh
So
no.
I can't tell you. 18 months on one show, maybe enough. And I think a lot of the sets basically are through to season 2 and maybe 3, and that's why budgetary wise for season 1 it was quite not high, but we knew we were amortizing over possibly a second season, the third season, the fourth season. The silo shafts, the apartments, the offices, they were all left standing and being able to rejig. So I'll be as excited to see season 2 as somebody who hasn't been involved. So
That's got to be fun too, when you hand off a project like that and see what, you pass the baton and see what the next person does.
yeah, I think there's a point where there's everybody has good ideas. So just after that amount of time to get somebody to bring a little something new to the show, that's not a bad thing, in that way. I've been on films before where I remember once I had about 9 months prep on a show, and it was a medieval show, and it got to the point after 9 months prep that I didn't have another castle in me. I just
You need a break, that's all. So
yes, it was almost like you need to get another designer for this, but it all worked out in the end. But I think once we've established the silo world, and we're very happy with that, it's a brilliant project to work on. But maybe it's time then to go and look for something exciting somewhere else.
well, Gavin, it was great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.